Deep in the hidden chambers of ancient Persia, under the flickering light of forbidden fires, a priest whispered words so dangerous that speaking them aloud could condemn his soul to eternal darkness. This was no ordinary prayer, it was a ritual so taboo that even the most devout Zoroastrians dared not record its full details, leaving only fragmented whispers across crumbling scrolls. Tonight, we pull back the veil on one of history's most secretive religions to reveal the 25 forbidden rituals of the ancient Zoroastrians, practices so shocking, so heretical, that they were systematically erased from history. Imagine a faith where light and darkness wage an eternal war, where priests wielded divine power but some dared to traffic with demons, and where the dead were buried face down to trap their souls forever. The Zoroastrians, one of the world's oldest monotheistic religions, preached purity and order, but beneath the surface lurked shadows, rituals of blood, deception, and unspeakable rebellion against their own God. These acts were so dangerous that even now, centuries later, their full truth remains buried in scattered fragments and coded texts. What you're about to witness are the echoes of rituals meant to be forgotten, the dark side of a religion that shaped empires. Stay with us, because by the end of this journey, you'll uncover secrets that challenge everything you thought you knew about ancient faiths, and one of these forbidden acts might just haunt your dreams tonight. Now, let's step into the shadowed halls where the first of these forbidden rites unfolded, the Haoma Sacrifice. At the heart of this ritual lay the sacred Haoma plant, a mysterious herb believed to bridge the gap between mortals and the divine. Priests would carefully prepare the plant, crushing its stems into a potent concoction said to unlock visions of the gods themselves. But this was no ordinary offering, it was a practice steeped in controversy. The Haoma ritual was once celebrated openly, a sacred act to commune with Ahura Mazda, the supreme god of light. Yet over time, whispers grew that the plant's effects were less divine and more intoxicating, distorting the mind rather than enlightening it. Reformers within the faith began to condemn it as heresy, a dangerous corruption of Zoroastrian purity. Fearful of persecution, priests who still clung to the old ways retreated into hidden chambers, performing the ritual in secrecy under the cover of night. Imagine the scene: the flicker of a single flame, the low hum of chants, and the bitter taste of the Haoma brew as it passed between trembling hands. Those who drank it claimed to see glimpses of the future or hear the voices of long-dead prophets. But with each vision came a risk: the wrath of both mortal authorities and the divine. To be caught performing the Haoma sacrifice meant exile or worse. Yet, even as the ritual faded into obscurity, fragments of its legacy survived. Some scholars believe the Haoma plant may have been a precursor to later hallucinogenic rites in other cultures, while others insist it was purely symbolic, its true meaning lost to time. What remains undeniable is the power it held over those who dared to partake, a fleeting taste of the divine at the cost of eternal condemnation, and this was only the beginning. The Haoma sacrifice reveals how easily the line between sacred and forbidden can blur, setting the stage for even darker rituals to come. But the shadows of Zoroastrian heresy grow darker still. If the Haoma sacrifice tested the boundaries of faith, the next forbidden ritual shattered them entirely: the blood pact with Daevas. In the stark duality of Zoroastrian belief, where light battled darkness, this act was the ultimate betrayal. The Daevas, demonic spirits who served Angra Mainyu, the destructive force opposing Ahura Mazda, were never to be summoned, let alone bargained with. Yet whispers tell of desperate souls who sought their power anyway. The ritual began in hidden places, caves, abandoned temples, or the dead of night. A participant would carve sacred symbols into their own flesh or the hide of a sacrificed animal, mixing their blood with ink to write binding oaths. Some accounts speak of even darker exchanges where human blood sealed the pact, the goal to gain unnatural strength, foresight, or vengeance against enemies. But the price was steep. The Daevas demanded not just blood but loyalty, twisting the supplicant's soul toward chaos. To the Zoroastrian faithful, this was more than heresy. It was an unholy inversion of their core beliefs. The religion's entire moral framework rested on choosing light over darkness, yet here were individuals willingly embracing the very forces they were sworn to resist. When discovered, punishment was swift and brutal. Offenders faced public execution, their bodies left unburied to deny them passage to the afterlife. Some texts even describe their names being erased from family records, as if they had never existed. What drove people to such extremes? Power, yes, but also despair. The blood pact often appealed to those with nothing left to lose, outcasts, rebels, or those cursed by misfortune. Yet the Daevas were never trustworthy allies. Legends tell of pact makers struck mad, their promised gifts revealed as cruel illusions. A few fragmented scrolls suggest these rituals persisted in secret for centuries, passed down like a cursed inheritance. But in the end, even the boldest summoners learned the same terrible lesson: no mortal can control the forces of darkness without being consumed by them. And if this ritual seems unthinkable, wait until you hear what came next. The Zoroastrians' most sacred symbol, the eternal fire, would soon become the target of an even more shocking act of defiance. Yet even the blasphemy of blood pacts paled in comparison to the ultimate sacrilege, the deliberate snuffing out of sacred fire. In Zoroastrian tradition, the eternal flame was no mere symbol. It was the living presence of Ahura Mazda's divine light, tended day and night by priests in temples across Persia. To extinguish it was to declare war on the very essence of their faith. The midnight fire extinguishing wasn't some secretive ritual performed in shadows. It was a brazen act of defiance, often carried out by dissident factions who saw themselves as reformers, or in some cases as challengers testing the limits of divine patience. These groups would infiltrate fire temples under cover of darkness, sometimes overpowering the attending priests. With calculated precision, they'd smother the flames using sand, water, or even their own robes. Historical fragments suggest some went further, scattering the ashes to the wind as a final insult. But why? Motives varied. Certain sects believed true faith shouldn't rely on physical symbols, while others saw it as a protest against corrupt clergy. The most extreme viewed it as a trial by ordeal. If Ahura Mazda's power was real, they argued, the fire would reignite itself. Unsurprisingly, it never did. Instead, the consequences were swift and severe. Perpetrators faced execution, their names stricken from records as if they'd never existed. Yet the legends claim the fire itself took vengeance. Whispers spoke of extinguishers struck blind, their hands blackening with unhealing burns. Some accounts describe entire villages near desecrated temples falling to plague or famine, as if the land itself mourned the lost flame. Perhaps most chilling are the rare texts that suggest these acts weren't always human-led. A few damaged scrolls allude to shadow priests, figures who appeared neither in temple records nor census rolls, coaxing devotees into extinguishing fires as part of some darker design. Were these agents of Angra Mainyu exploiting doubt to weaken the faith from within? We may never know. But one truth remains. In a religion built on light's triumph over darkness, the killing of sacred fire was the closest thing to pure heresy. And just when you think the depths of defiance have been plumbed, history reveals another twist, because what followed was a corruption not of fire, but of flesh, a ritual so abhorrent it turned burial traditions into instruments of torment. But the defiance didn't stop with fire. In the hushed corners of ancient Persia, darker rituals took root, practices that twisted sacred words and burial rites into weapons of malice. Among these, none were more feared than the whispered curses and shadow burials, two abominations that perverted Zoroastrianism's core tenets of purity and light. The whispered curses were no ordinary threats. These were meticulously crafted incantations, spoken in secret to summon misfortune upon enemies. Unlike the faith's sacred prayers, which invoked Ahura Mazda's blessings, these curses called upon malevolent spirits to inflict suffering. The worst part, they worked. Survivors' accounts describe sudden illnesses, failed harvests, and even unexplained deaths plaguing those targeted. Priests condemned the practice as a violation of free will, a theft of divine justice by those who dared play God. Yet even these dark words paled beside the horror of shadow burials. In Zoroastrian tradition, corpses were laid atop towers of silence, exposed to the sun and scavengers to free the soul. But in this twisted rite, bodies were buried face down in sealed pits, often with nails driven into their hands or hair stuffed in their mouths. The intent was clear: to trap the soul in eternal darkness, denying it passage to the afterlife. Archaeological digs have uncovered such graves, their occupants twisted into unnatural positions, silent witnesses to a ritual so vile, even mentioning it was once punishable by death. What linked these rituals wasn't just their cruelty, but their corruption of sacred principles. Zoroastrianism taught that words held creative power, prayers could shape reality. The whispered curses weaponized that belief. Similarly, burial rites honored the body as a vessel for the soul's journey. Shadow burials made it a prison. Both acts were seen as surrendering to Angra Mainyu's influence, a rejection of the cosmic struggle between light and darkness. And as we'll soon see, the perversion of sacred rites didn't end there. Because when devotion turns to deceit, even marriage, a bond meant to uphold divine order, can become a tool of heresy. But heresy wasn't confined to curses and graves. Even the most sacred bonds could be twisted into something forbidden. Among the Zoroastrian elite, a shocking ritual defied divine law: the marriage of siblings or close kin, a practice so taboo it was whispered about only in the darkest corridors of power. Royal families justified these unions as a way to preserve bloodlines and consolidate authority, claiming their divine right placed them above ordinary morality. But priests saw it differently. To them, these marriages weren't just scandalous, they were an affront to the very order Ahura Mazda had decreed. Ancient texts describe ceremonies held in secret, where fire altars were draped in black silk and vows were exchanged under the dim light of censored stars. The brides and grooms wore rings inscribed not with blessings but with symbols of dominion, a silent declaration that power trumped piety. The political motives were impossible to ignore. By marrying within the family, kings ensured no outsider could claim their throne through marriage alliances. It was control disguised as tradition, but the priests raged against this arrogance, warning that such unions invited Angra Mainyu's corruption into the heart of the empire. Rebellions erupted when the truth leaked, with mobs burning palaces and demanding purges of the royal court. Yet the most chilling detail: some of these marriages were said to be loveless contracts, sealed not for passion or even loyalty, but to produce heirs who would carry the taint of their parents' defiance. And as we'll discover next, defiance took even darker forms, where sacred fire wasn't just ignored but deliberately snuffed out. But the defiance of sacred fire didn't stop at mere extinguishing. Some took their rebellion even further, perverting the very rituals meant to honor Ahura Mazda. Enter the Black Yasna, a sinister mirror of the holiest Zoroastrian ceremony. Where the traditional Yasna celebrated light and order, this corrupted version whispered devotion to darkness itself. Practitioners gathered in hidden chambers, their faces veiled as they offered sacrifices not to the divine, but to Angra Mainyu, the destructive spirit. The prayers were inverted, each sacred word twisted into a blasphemy. Milk and honey, symbols of purity, were replaced with blood and ashes. The ritual fire, normally a beacon of truth, burned blackened herbs that choked the air with smoke, a deliberate mockery of the divine flame. What made the Black Yasna especially chilling was its duality. By day, those who participated might be respected priests or officials, publicly reciting orthodox prayers without a hint of heresy. But under cover of night, they became something else entirely. Ancient texts describe how these double lives required meticulous secrecy. Ritual tools were buried after use. Whispers were muffled by the sound of running water to avoid detection. Even the timing of the ceremonies followed the lunar cycle, ensuring the darkest nights hid their deeds. The most unsettling detail: some accounts suggest these practitioners believed their inverted rituals held real power, that by defiling the sacred they could harness chaos itself. And as we'll soon see, that hunger for forbidden power would spill over into even more visceral acts of defiance against the natural order. But the perversion of sacred rituals didn't end with twisted ceremonies. Some took their defiance beyond the living, targeting the dead in acts so shocking they sent waves of terror through Zoroastrian communities. This brings us to the chilling practice of corpse defilement, a deliberate violation of the most sacred Zoroastrian death rites. In a faith where purity was paramount, the treatment of the dead held profound significance. Bodies were carefully washed and placed atop towers of silence, exposed to the elements so they wouldn't pollute the earth. But those who practiced corpse defilement sought to sabotage this sacred journey. They drove nails into the flesh of the deceased or tangled human hair around their limbs, believing these acts would trap the soul, preventing its ascent to the afterlife. Archaeologists have uncovered grim evidence of this taboo. In one dig near an ancient Zoroastrian burial site, skeletons were found with iron nails embedded in their bones, some driven straight through the skull. Another discovery revealed corpses with strands of hair woven tightly around their fingers and toes as if binding them in place. These weren't accidents or battle wounds. They were intentional desecrations meant to curse the dead for eternity. The theological backlash was swift and severe. Zoroastrian texts raged against these acts, calling them the work of drudge, a term for deceit and chaos. Priests warned that defiling a corpse risked angering both the divine and the trapped spirits, who might linger as vengeful shadows. Fear spread so widely that guardians were posted at towers of silence, and families began secretly watching over their loved ones' remains until the final rites were complete. What's most haunting is the motive behind these acts. Some scholars believe it was personal vengeance, a way to eternally punish an enemy. Others suggest it was a twisted attempt to harness spiritual energy, as if the trapped souls could be controlled. Whatever the reason, corpse defilement revealed a dark undercurrent in a faith built on light, proving that even in death, the battle between order and chaos raged on. And as we'll see next, this hunger to manipulate the afterlife took even more unsettling forms. But the manipulation of the dead wasn't the only way Zoroastrians flirted with forbidden forces. Some sought to bend the unseen world to their will through rituals that twisted sacred tools into instruments of darkness. Among these, two stand out for their eerie creativity: mirror divination and dream poisoning. Mirror divination took an object meant to reflect truth and corrupted it into a gateway for malevolent spirits. Practitioners would gather in dimly lit chambers, polishing bronze mirrors until they gleamed, then whispering forbidden names into their surfaces. They believed these reflections could reveal hidden knowledge, but at a terrible cost. Ancient texts warn that gazing too long into such mirrors risked summoning the Azotas, lesser spirits who often brought chaos instead of wisdom. Some accounts describe diviners who vanished after sessions, leaving behind only shattered glass and whispers of something moving within the reflections. Dream poisoning, on the other hand, weaponized Zoroastrianism's deep respect for prophetic visions. Herbalists would brew potent elixirs from nightshade and poppy, slipping them into the drinks of chosen targets. The goal: to induce vivid, terrifying nightmares that could be interpreted or even directed by the poisoner. One recovered scroll describes a noblewoman who, after drinking the cup of false dawn, screamed prophecies of her family's downfall for 3 nights straight. Whether these visions came from the divine or the drudge was hotly debated, but the damage was undeniable. What makes these rituals especially chilling is how they perverted Zoroastrianism's sacred relationship with visions. The faith held that dreams and reflections could be divine messages, but only when received with purity. By hijacking these channels with dark intent, practitioners didn't just break taboos. They turned the very tools of enlightenment into weapons of control. And as we'll soon see, when such manipulations reached their peak, they sparked rituals so blasphemous they threatened to unravel the faith itself. Now let's step into one of the most audacious deceptions in Zoroastrian history, the false Frashokereti. While the faithful awaited the true Frashokereti, the prophesied resurrection at the end of time, rogue cults saw an opportunity to exploit this hope for power. These groups staged elaborate, terrifying spectacles, fake apocalypses designed to convince followers that the end had arrived, and only their leaders could guide them through it. Imagine the scene: midnight processions with torches casting long shadows, priests wearing masks of divine beings, and sudden miracles like blood-red moons or trembling earth, all carefully orchestrated to mimic the signs of the true Frashokereti. Followers were told the world was ending and salvation required absolute obedience and often the surrender of wealth or loyalty to rival factions. One account describes a cult in the Sistan region that convinced hundreds to abandon their homes, claiming the final battle between light and darkness had begun. But mainstream Zoroastrians weren't fooled for long. When these fraudulent rituals came to light, the reaction was swift and brutal. High priests declared the cult servants of Angra and mobs burned their meeting places to the ground. Surviving texts speak of purification by iron, a grim euphemism for the executions that followed. What makes this ritual uniquely disturbing isn't just the deception, it's how it weaponized one of Zoroastrianism's most sacred beliefs, turning the promise of renewal into a tool of control. And as we'll see next, when such manipulations grew too bold, they sparked even darker rituals, ones that didn't just mimic the divine but sought to defy it entirely. But the defiance of sacred traditions didn't stop there. One of the most shocking distortions of Zoroastrian practice was the chained navjot, a twisted version of the sacred initiation rite meant to welcome young believers into the faith. Normally, the navjot ceremony is a joyous occasion where children around the age of 7 or 8 receive the sacred sudre and kasti garments, symbolizing their commitment to Ahura Mazda's light. But in this forbidden ritual, initiates were bound with heavy iron chains instead, a deliberate mockery of their intended purity. The chains weren't just physical, they were spiritual shackles representing a vow of servitude to the forces of darkness. Recovered texts from the Sasanian era describe how these rituals were performed in hidden caves or abandoned temples, far from the eyes of Orthodox priests. One fragment speaks of a chant whispered over the bound children: "By iron you are marked, by shadow you are claimed." It's a chilling contrast to the traditional navjot prayers, which celebrate free will and the choice to follow righteousness. Why would anyone corrupt a rite meant for innocence? Scholars suggest these acts were tied to underground cults that rejected Zoroastrian dualism, believing that submission to Angra Mainyu was the only path to power. Mainstream priests, of course, saw it as pure blasphemy. A surviving decree from the High Moab of Pars threatens the severing of hands for anyone caught performing the chained navjot, proof of how deeply it unsettled the religious establishment. What makes this ritual especially haunting is its inversion of symbolism. Where the sudre and kasti represent protection and spiritual strength, the chains were meant to break it. And as we'll soon see, this perversion of sacred objects wasn't an isolated act, it was part of a far darker pattern. But the defiance didn't end with twisted rituals. Sometimes rebellion came in the form of silence. Enter the Silent Moab, a rogue priest who committed one of the most unthinkable acts in Zoroastrianism, refusing to speak the sacred prayers. In a faith where the spoken word holds divine power, where hymns and invocations are the very threads weaving the cosmic order, silence wasn't just disobedience, it was heresy. These priests took a forbidden vow, sealing their lips against the holy verses they were sworn to recite. imagine the scandal, a mobe draped in ritual white standing before the fire altar utterly mute. To Orthodox believers, it was like watching light itself flicker out. Texts from the late Sasanian period describe these figures as tongueless shadows, men who abandoned their duty to Ahura Mazda in a protest so stark it shook the foundations of their communities. But why would a priest choose silence? Some scholars argue it was an act of despair, a response to corruption within the temples where politics often overshadowed piety. Others believe these mobes were influenced by radical sects that saw vocal prayer as a distraction from inner enlightenment. Whatever their motives, the consequences were severe. Accounts speak of silent mobes vanishing overnight, their homes found empty, their ritual tools left untouched. Some whispers claimed they were taken by divine wrath, while darker rumors suggested the high priests had them silenced permanently. One chilling fragment from a 6th century scroll recounts the fate of a mobe named Vaharam. For 3 moons he stood before the fire and did not speak. On the 4th, his chamber was empty, save for his custody, coiled like a serpent on the floor. Whether these priests were martyrs or madmen, their defiance left a haunting question. In a religion built on words, what happens when the voices meant to uphold it simply stop? And as we'll see next, even the dead weren't safe from these acts of sacrilege. But the defiance of sacred laws took an even darker turn, one that twisted the very purpose of Zoroastrian burial rites. Picture this: instead of carrying the dead to the towers of silence, where vultures would cleanse their bones under the open sky, shadowy practitioners dragged the living to those heights. This was the reverse Tower of Silence, a ritual so blasphemous it inverted the core Zoroastrian belief in purity after death. Normally, exposure on the towers allowed the soul to ascend freely, untouched by corrupting elements like earth or fire. But in this forbidden act, the dying were placed atop the towers while still clinging to life, their final breaths taken amidst the stench of decay. Ancient texts claim this trapped their souls mid-flight, binding them to the physical world in a state of torment. Some scrolls even describe priests chanting backward verses from the Avesta, as if sewing the dying person's spirit into the fabric of the tower itself. Why would anyone commit such an atrocity? Fragmentary accounts point to necromancy, whispers of cults seeking to harness unresolved souls for divination or power. A 7th century Persian chronicle accuses a noble family of using the ritual to commune with ancestors, forcing their lingering spirits to reveal secrets. Others suggest it was a form of punishment reserved for traitors or heretics, ensuring their eternal unrest. Archaeological evidence adds eerie weight to these tales. In the ruins of a tower near Yazd, researchers found iron manacles bolted to the stone, along with bones showing signs of struggle, most chilling of all. Several skulls bore tiny holes drilled into the foreheads, a practice some link to attempts at soul anchoring. The Orthodox response was predictably brutal. Any accused of this ritual faced execution by exposure themselves, their bodies left to rot without funerary rites. Yet the fear lingered. For generations, Zoroastrians avoided certain towers at night, convinced the air still hummed with trapped voices. And as we'll soon discover, even the holiest ceremonies weren't immune to such perversions. Now, let's step into the realm of forbidden divination and twisted hymns, where sacred objects became tools of dark prophecy. Among the most unsettling distortions of Zoroastrian practice was the copper bowl divination, a ritual that turned a simple vessel into a window to the unknown. Priests would fill a polished copper bowl, normally used for sacred offerings, with the blood of sacrificed animals or, in some accounts, even human blood. Gazing into its dark reflection, they sought glimpses of the future, a direct violation of Zoroastrian teachings that condemned fortune-telling as interference with divine will. Ancient texts describe how the bowl's surface would ripple unnaturally, showing fragmented visions of war, plague, or personal doom. Some practitioners claim to hear whispers from the blood itself, as if the liquid had absorbed the voices of the dead. But the corruption didn't end there. Alongside this dark divination came the cursed hymns, a perversion of the sacred gathas, the hymns attributed to Zoroaster himself. Instead of chanting these holy verses to honor Ahura Mazda, rogue priests would sing them backward, syllable by syllable, in hidden chambers. This inversion was believed to unravel the divine order, summoning chaos and inviting the influence of Angra Mainyu. Manuscripts warn that those who performed this ritual reported hearing echoes of laughter in the shadows, or feeling an unnatural chill even in the heat of fire-lit rooms. What made these rituals especially blasphemous was their misuse of sacred objects. The copper bowl, meant to hold offerings of purity, became a vessel of defilement. The gathas, composed to uplift the soul, were twisted into a weapon against cosmic harmony. Both acts exploited the very tools of faith to undermine it, a betrayal that horrified Orthodox Zoroastrians. Evidence of these rituals surfaces in rare fragments. A dig near Persepolis uncovered a copper bowl etched with inverted Zoroastrian symbols, its interior stained dark. Elsewhere, a scroll fragment condemns a priest for singing the divine words into the mouth of darkness. The punishment for such acts was severe, often execution by burning, as fire was seen as the only force capable of cleansing such profound sacrilege. Yet the allure of forbidden knowledge proved hard to resist. As we'll see next, even celestial events like eclipses became moments for unspeakable rites, when the balance between light and darkness seemed to waver. But when the sun itself seemed to falter, the most desperate turned to even darker rites. During a solar eclipse, ancient Zoroastrians believed the light of Ahura Mazda grew weak, and in that fleeting shadow, forbidden opportunities arose. The eclipse sacrifice was a ritual of terrifying urgency. As the sun darkened, rogue priests would lead secret gatherings in caves or abandoned temples, far from the eyes of Orthodox followers. The chosen animal, often a black goat or bull, was slaughtered not on an altar but directly on the earth, its blood soaking into the ground as an offering to the forces of darkness. Manuscripts describe how the participants would whisper pleas to the Daevas, the demonic entities Zoroastrians normally shunned, begging for power, vengeance, or forbidden knowledge. What made this ritual uniquely dangerous was its timing. Eclipses were seen as moments when the cosmic balance tipped, when Angra Mainyu's influence briefly rivaled Ahura Mazda's. By performing sacrifices in that liminal space, practitioners believed they could bypass divine judgment. Some accounts even suggest they drank the blood of the sacrificed animal, hoping to absorb its vitality before the sun returned. The aftermath was just as chilling. As daylight restored, participants would scatter, but not before marking their skin with ash or blood in hidden symbols, a pact sealed in the eclipse's shadow. Orthodox texts claim these marks glowed faintly in the dark, proof of the dark forces now bound to the wearer. Unsurprisingly, those caught with such signs faced execution, their bodies burned to prevent their corrupted souls from polluting the earth. Archaeology hints at these rituals. Near Yazd, a cave was discovered with charred animal bones arranged in a spiral, alongside a copper dagger etched with eclipse symbols. Even more telling, the bones were carbon dated to the year 539 B.C., a year when a total solar eclipse passed directly over Persia. Yet the eclipse was not the only celestial event twisted into heresy. As we'll soon uncover, even the sacred texts themselves became targets in rituals meant to erase divine wisdom forever. But the defiance of sacred traditions did not stop with celestial events. Some took their rebellion even further, targeting the very foundation of Zoroastrian wisdom itself, the Avesta. The burnt Avesta was an act of calculated blasphemy. Rebellious priests, often disillusioned with orthodox teachings or seeking to dismantle the faith from within, would gather copies of the sacred texts and set them alight in hidden ceremonies. These weren't accidental fires or acts of war. They were deliberate, ritualized destructions meant to erase divine knowledge from the world. the flames were seen as a perverse inversion of the sacred fire, which normally purified and illuminated. Instead, these fires sought to obliterate. What makes this ritual especially chilling is the precision behind it. Surviving fragments of the Avesta contain cryptic references to these burnings, some even describing the act as a second death, for the words of Ahura Mazda. One damaged manuscript discovered in a cave near Bam includes a haunting passage. When the pages blacken and curl, the truth turns to smoke and only the liar remains. Archaeologists have uncovered charred remnants of Avestan texts in remote locations, often buried alongside other forbidden objects, daggers, broken mirrors, and sometimes even the bones of those who may have carried out the burnings. The most telling detail, many of these fragments show signs of being torn or cut before burning, suggesting the priests targeted specific verses they found most objectionable. Yet heresy has a strange way of preserving itself. Ironically, some of the most detailed accounts of these burnings come from the very texts that survived them. Orthodox scribes, horrified by the acts, meticulously recorded descriptions of the destroyed manuscripts, ensuring that even in their absence, the knowledge of their loss would endure. This tension between destruction and preservation leads us to an even more audacious act of deception: the rise of false prophets who claim divine authority to rewrite the faith itself. But the deception didn't end with the burning of sacred texts. In the shadows of Zoroastrian history, an even bolder heresy took root: the rise of false messiahs. These impostors claimed to be the Sacrilegious, the prophesied savior who would lead humanity into a new age of purity. What made their betrayal so dangerous was not just the lie itself, but the elaborate rituals they staged to make it believable. Imagine a scene where a chosen figure, draped in white robes, stands before a crowd as priests anoint them with sacred oils. Firelight flickers against golden vessels and chants fill the air, but every word, every gesture is a carefully crafted illusion. These cults didn't just declare their leader the Sacrilegious, they reenacted ancient prophecies down to the smallest detail. Some even orchestrated miracles, like sudden healings or celestial signs, using hidden accomplices or clever tricks to manipulate the faithful. Yet the truth always unraveled. Discrepancies in their knowledge of scripture, failed predictions, or the greed of their inner circle often exposed them. One infamous case recorded in the Denkard describes a false Sacrilegious whose followers turned against him after he demanded their wealth as offerings to hasten the end times. When the promised apocalypse never came, his own priests handed him over to the authorities. The punishment for such blasphemy was severe. Historical accounts speak of executions carried out not just as penalties, but as rituals themselves, purifying the community of the corruption. Some impostors were cast into wells, a symbolic return to the darkness they claimed to conquer. Others were bound in chains made from melted down temple vessels, their very restraints forged from the faith they betrayed. What's chilling is how these frauds exploited the deepest hopes of their followers. The Sacrilegious was meant to bring light, yet these pretenders twisted that longing into a tool of control. And in doing so, they left behind a warning etched in blood and fire. Even the most sacred prophecies can be weaponized by those who know how to manipulate belief. This dark interplay of faith and fraud sets the stage for an even more unsettling ritual, one that blurred the line between devotion and damnation. Now we descend deeper into the shadows of Zoroastrian heresy, where the line between devotion and desecration grows disturbingly thin. The 20th forbidden ritual takes us into the realm of the bone amulets, a practice so taboo it was whispered about only in the darkest corners. These weren't ordinary talismans. Crafted from human bones, often finger bones or fragments of skull, they were believed to siphon the life force of the dead and transfer it to the living. The process was gruesomely precise. Bones had to be taken from corpses before the traditional exposure on the Towers of Silence, ensuring the soul remained trapped and its energy harvestable. Some texts even describe rituals where the bone was carved under the light of a waning moon, its surface etched with inverted prayers to Angra Mainyu. Archaeology has unearthed chilling evidence of these amulets. In clandestine graves near Persepolis, diggers found small bone fragments drilled with holes strung on cords darkened by age. One particularly grim discovery revealed a child's rib bone tucked inside a clay jar, wrapped in a scrap of parchment bearing a curse. Forensic analysis showed cut marks consistent with ritual scoring, proof these weren't accidental burials but deliberate acts of forbidden magic. What makes these amulets especially sinister is their betrayal of Zoroastrian purity laws. The faith taught that corpses were unclean, to be exposed to the elements so their corruption wouldn't taint the earth. Yet here, practitioners actively handled and manipulated bones, seeking to weaponize decay itself. Worse still, some accounts suggest the amulets were sometimes made from the bones of enemies or rivals, turning the dead into unwilling participants in their own vengeance. But the darkest twist, these amulets didn't just steal vitality. They were said to doom both the wearer and the stolen soul. By binding themselves to unresolved spirits, users risked attracting restless entities that would haunt them long after the amulet's power faded. Perhaps that's why so many of these artifacts were found buried hastily, as if their owners had tried too late to sever the connection. This macabre trade in stolen life force leads us to an even more unsettling practice, one that turned the sacred towers of silence into stages for midnight horrors. As we step further into the forbidden, the night itself becomes an accomplice to these unholy rites. The 21st and 22nd rituals, the moonlit dakma and the whispering dead, unfold under the cold gaze of the moon, where the sacred towers of silence transform into stages for unspeakable acts. Under cover of darkness, secretive groups would creep to these towers, not to honor the dead, but to commune with them. Medieval texts describe robed figures kneeling beside exposed corpses, pressing their ears to gaping mouths as if listening for whispers from the other side. Some accounts claim these midnight visitors sought prophecies, believing the recently dead could glimpse the future. Others suggest darker motives, attempts to bind spirits as familiars or extract secrets buried with the deceased. But the horror didn't end with whispered conversations. The second part of this dual ritual involved feeding the dead with foods strictly forbidden in Zoroastrian tradition. Normally, corpses were left untouched, their purity maintained by exposure to scavenging birds. Yet here, participants would place offerings of rotting meat or fermented fruit directly into the mouths of the deceased, a grotesque mockery of funeral rites. One 10th-century manuscript recounts a noblewoman's confession. She admitted leaving honey-soaked bread laced with henbane, a deadly hallucinogen, on her husband's corpse, hoping to poison his soul's journey. The most chilling detail, these rituals often targeted specific corpses, those who died violently or by suicide. Practitioners believed such souls lingered closer to the living, their unrest making them easier to manipulate. In the ruins of a fire temple near Yazd, archaeologists found a hidden cellar containing clay tablets that detailed moonlit invocations directed at the corpse of a murdered priest. The tablets warned that if the ritual succeeded, the priest's spirit would reveal his killer's name but fail, and the summoner risked inheriting his unfinished rage. What makes these rites so profoundly taboo is their inversion of Zoroastrian death customs. The faith taught that the dead must be released cleanly, their bodies returning to nature without interference. Yet here, the deceased became puppets in macabre ceremonies, their silence violated, their decay weaponized. Small wonder that those caught performing these rituals faced execution, their own bodies left unburied on the very towers they defiled. And as the moon sets on these spectral crimes, we turn to a ritual that defiled the very beginning of life, but now we descend into a ritual that strikes at life's very threshold, where light should greet the newborn, but darkness crept in instead. The 23rd forbidden act, known as the fireless birth, was considered one of the most grievous violations in Zoroastrian society. In a faith where fire symbolized Ahura Mazda's divine presence, bringing a child into the world without its sacred glow was seen as condemning that soul to eternal shadow. Traditionally, Zoroastrian births were guarded by ritual flames purifying the space, warding off evil spirits and ensuring the infant's first breath drew in holiness. But whispers tell of midwives who defied this practice, delivering babies in darkened rooms or even underground chambers, deliberately extinguishing every torch and brazier. Some did so under coercion, aiding noble families hiding illegitimate heirs. Others acted on heretical beliefs, convinced that children born without fire's taint would develop hidden powers to see beyond the material world. The consequences were swift and severe. Texts from the Sasanian era describe midwives caught performing fireless births being exiled to barren islands, their hands symbolically burned to ash before banishment. In one chilling account, a royal physician's journal recounts a noblewoman's execution after she secretly bore twins without fire, her body sealed inside a lightless tomb alongside the infants, lest their shadows infect the living. Archaeology hints at darker truths. Excavations near Persepolis uncovered a sealed cellar filled with tiny, fireless clay lamps, each believed to represent a child delivered in darkness. Worse still, some lamps contained traces of blood, suggesting these births weren't merely taboo, they were sacrificial. A fragmented scroll found nearby speaks of a cult that sought to create children of the void, believing them destined to overthrow the cosmic order. What makes this ritual uniquely horrifying is its perversion of hope. Birth in Zoroastrianism was a moment of divine joy, a new warrior for light entering the world. Yet here it became a gateway for calculated despair, and as we grapple with this violation of life's dawn, our path leads to an even more brazen blasphemy, one where priests wore virtue as a disguise. Now we step into a realm where deception wore the robes of holiness, the 24th forbidden ritual known as the Asha's shadow. In Zoroastrianism, Asha represented divine truth, the cosmic order upheld by Ahura Mazda. But hidden within temple archives lies evidence of priests who twisted this sacred concept into a mask for their darkest acts. These rogue clerics performed a chilling inversion of their duties. By day, they led prayers in white robes, symbols of purity, but by night, they donned black garments mimicking Asha's shadow to conduct profane ceremonies. Temple records from Yaz describe missing ritual objects, silver bowls later found defiled with animal blood, sacred fires inexplicably dimming during their watch. One fragmented scroll accuses a high-ranking Mobad of chanting the Gathas backward while wearing his black robe, a deliberate corruption of Zoroastrianism's holiest hymns. The motivation behind this double life remains debated. Some scholars argue these priests served political factions, using their influence to sabotage rival temples. Others point to heretical texts suggesting they sought to balance light and darkness through perverse symmetry, corrupting as many rituals as they performed purely. The most unsettling theory comes from a 6th century trial record, where a captured priest confessed his group believed Ahura Mazda and Angra Mainyu were two faces of one god, and their blasphemies were acts of devotion. Archaeology adds grim weight to these accounts. Beneath a ruined temple in Fars province, excavators uncovered a hidden chamber containing black robes embroidered with inverted sacred symbols. Worse still, the walls bore scratches matching the precise height of bound human hands, suggesting this space witnessed forced participation. What makes the Asha's shadow uniquely disturbing isn't just the evil acts, but their staging within the heart of holiness. These priests didn't reject Asha, they weaponized its imagery, turning divine order into a theater for chaos. And as we confront this ultimate betrayal of trust, our journey reaches its climax with a ritual so forbidden, even speaking its name was said to curse the tongue. Now we arrive at the final and most horrifying taboo, the 25th forbidden rite, known simply as the unmaking. This was no ordinary act of self-destruction. but a meticulously crafted ritual designed to annihilate the soul itself, defying the very foundations of Zoroastrian afterlife beliefs. Scattered fragments of suppressed manuscripts describe a chilling sequence. The participant, often a disgraced priest or heretical scholar, would first purify themselves for 40 days, not with sacred fire, but with ashes from extinguished temple flames. On the night of the winter solstice, when darkness reigns longest, they would carve the name of Angra Mainyu onto their chest using a rusted blade, symbolizing their rejection of both divine judgment and redemption. The final act involved reciting an inverted version of the Frashokereti prayer, the very declaration of faith, while swallowing a lethal mixture of poisoned Haoma and crushed human bone. What makes the unmaking uniquely terrifying is its theological rebellion. Zoroastrianism teaches that souls face judgment after death, ascending to paradise or descending into darkness. But this ritual sought to obliterate that destiny entirely. A 10th century parchment discovered in a sealed cave near Bam warns that successful participants would unweave their fravashi, the divine essence of the soul, leaving nothing for either Ahura Mazda or the forces of evil to claim. The few surviving accounts suggest this was more than personal despair. It was an ideological weapon. A crumbling scroll from the Sasanian era describes a secret sect called the Void Walkers, who believed existence itself was a mistake. By erasing their souls, they aimed to chip away at the fabric of creation, hastening an apocalypse where neither light nor darkness would remain. Modern scholars debate whether the unmaking was ever completed successfully. But in the ruins of a mountain shrine in Kerman, archaeologists found a sealed chamber containing 5 skeletons arranged in a star pattern, each with their ribcage splayed open in mimicry of Zoroastrian winged symbols. Most haunting of all, not a single bone showed signs of decomposition, as if even time refused to claim them. With this, our journey through the shadows of Zoroastrian history ends not with a whisper, but with a ritual that sought to silence the soul itself. These forbidden acts reveal a startling truth. Even in the most rigidly structured faiths, human defiance carves its own dark paths. Now we turn to you. Which of these 25 rituals unsettled you the most? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more explorations into history's hidden corners. As we step back from these 25 forbidden rituals, one thing becomes undeniably clear: the ancient Zoroastrians, despite their strict devotion to order and light, wrestled with the same dark temptations that haunt all human faith. These hidden practices reveal a startling duality. For every sacred fire tended by priests, there were secret chambers where flames were snuffed out. For every prayer to Ahura Mazda, whispers to Angra Mainyu lingered in the shadows. What makes these rituals so compelling isn't just their shock value, but what they tell us about belief itself. Even in a religion built on cosmic balance between good and evil, people carved out spaces to rebel, to experiment, or to grasp power beyond divine approval. The Haoma Sacrifice, the Black Yasna, the unmaking, each was a crack in the theological armor, proving that no system is immune to human defiance, and perhaps that's the real lesson here. Forbidden rituals aren't just historical curiosities. They're mirrors reflecting our deepest fears and desires. The Zoroastrians feared chaos, yet their darkest rites flirted with it openly. They revered purity, yet some sought corruption like a drug. This tension between doctrine and deviation echoes in every faith, in every era. So now we pass the question to you. Which of these 25 rituals left you most unsettled? Was it the bone amulets stealing vitality, the false seiscient deceiving believers, or the unmaking soul-shattering finality? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. We're eager to hear which shadows lingered in your mind. If this journey into Zoroastrianism's hidden corners gripped you, don't forget to like and subscribe. History's forbidden chapters are vast, and we've only just begun to uncover them. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an exploration into the mysteries that shaped our world. Until next time, keep questioning and keep digging deeper. The past has far more secrets left to reveal.